going to open it up and have sort of a free-form discussion, a lot of opportunity for you all to weigh in and then to hear commentary and thoughts, in some cases synergistic, in some cases perhaps complementary or opposite. If there's any of that, that would be fantastic. It would actually make for a good discussion. Since there is no one right answer, there are a multitude of perspectives. So with that, let me say a few words about myself, and then I'd like to briefly introduce and welcome our panelists, and then turn the microphone over to them. I'm an IIT alum from many years ago. I got a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, which you will hear in a few minutes. I'm like the oddball here. Other than not being a panelist or a subject matter expert, none of these guys are mechanical engineers, but I am. I got a master's and spent a number of years in the area, in the Boston area, as a technologist. Those were the early days before kind of Al Gore, the information superhighway, .com 1.0, whatever you want to call that, that era. Long before Google and probably even Yahoo, and certainly long before malware and cyber, security was an issue and a thing, and threats even existed. But I was a software engineer and a technologist. I went to business school somewhere along the way, and even though I play in the technology sandbox for the last couple of decades, I've crossed over to the commercial side. So I play in technology, I live and breathe enterprise software and cloud. I've lived through the NotPetya, a giant malware attack that had directly affected a company I worked for at the time, Nuance. They had an outfit in Ukraine, and that's where the virus sort of entered. It came through the walls, probably were porous. So we'll come to that a little later on. So my only connection to cybersecurity really is that I'm on the user side. I live in the same high-threat world we all live in. And I'm here as much as you all to learn from the three of you today. So with that being said, let me introduce briefly, say a few words about each of you, and then I'm going to invite you to take the microphone, say a little bit about yourself, a little bit more, and then maybe also walk us through some perspectives. So to my immediate right, Alan Rogers. Alan is a well-known cybersecurity entrepreneur and an engineering leader in the Boston area, having been involved in the creation and successful IPO or acquisition of several Boston-based cybersecurity startups. And I'm not going to go through the list, but it might be interesting at some point in your intro or through the conversation to hear a little bit more, bring some of that into the picture. His focus has ranged from network firewalls to enterprise digital rights management technologies, to security orchestration and automation solutions, and much, much more. He is currently the VP of Engineering for the, and I want to say SOAR, you guys call it SOAR? Okay, so it is an acronym, but I'm going to call it the SOAR product suite, the industry's first security orchestration and automated response platform inside of IBM's security division, where he drives product strategy and engineering execution. Alan has a bachelor's and a master's in EE. I'm going to actually go around the circle, and then I'll pass the microphone to you, Alan. So thank you again for being here today. Next, to the right of Alan is Charles Munson. Charlie is a cybersecurity researcher at MIT Lincoln Labs. Charlie is a member of the Keyline development team. I hope that that is generally correct, and please expand on it further in a minute. Keyline is a hardware-based root of trust module. Can be plugged into cloud-based security modules. It allows users to establish a hardware-based root of trust for management of their encryption keys. It grew out of a federally funded project at MIT's Lincoln Labs, And just to complete the brief sort of profile, Charlie has a number of degrees in computer engineering and electrical and computer engineering, most recently getting his PhD from Georgia Tech in 2016. Again, thank you for joining us today. And to his right, all the way at the end here, Chandra Pandey. Thank you for joining us, Chandra. Chandra is the founder and CEO of Seceon Inc. And has been in that role since 2004. Seceon empowers enterprises and MSSPs. I guess you're going to have to help me out with that, but a service provider of some kind, okay, to provide comprehensive cybersecurity for the digital era through the coalescence of Seceon's dynamic threat models, machine learning, and AI with actionable contextual awareness to proactively surface threats and breaches that matter, as well as to automatically contain them and eliminate them in real time. Seceon has an open threat management platform that I'm hopeful that you'll share more about in a few minutes, that can scale to millions of assets, collect, essentially gather raw data. And then Seceon can curate this and provide sort of visibility and threat intelligence. And again, I'm highly stylizing this because I don't want to misstate it. Bear with me. But it is on that platform are available a number of award-winning solutions to support enterprise comprehensive cybersecurity. So that's the enterprise, kind of the world I inhabit, as well as service providers offering services into that space. Chandra has previously worked in technical and leadership roles at a number of different places. And again, I'm not going to go through them, but there's a number of interesting stops along the way. And later on in the Q&A, I might come back to asking each of you how you got to cybersecurity, because clearly in some instances around the table here, you did not spend your entire career in cybersecurity. And so it kind of will be interesting to see how that happened, why that happened, as we kind of step back and look forward. Chandra as well has a BS in EE and an MBA. So with that, I'm going to pause and I'm going to go back to Alan. And Alan, I believe, before I pass the microphone to you guys, the panelists, let me turn to you all. By the way, it takes two hands to clap. We all live in an interconnected world, and issues don't live, as we're going to talk about firewalls and boundaries and boundary breaching. There's porosity. So I think it's good to get perspectives from all sides, and I welcome participation and questions from whatever vantage point you're at right now. Also, how many of you are this is not tech, non-tech, but this is cybersecurity, non-cybersecurity. How many of you play in a cybersecurity sandbox, either providing services or have responsibility inside an enterprise at this point? Okay, so that's a smaller group. Again, I'm going to assume it's not necessarily a subset of tech, but it looks like we have about 70% technical technologists, and probably about, on the second dimension, about 20% of people with familiarity, and maybe 80% of us, myself included, who are here, probably starting from a foundation, not entirely a blank sheet. We do read the papers and read the internet, and some of us have lived through malware attacks. So I would invite you, as you craft your comments, to reflect the fact that some of us are neophytes, and some of us are probably a little bit more seasoned, and you might get that in the questions. So with that being said, and without further ado, I'm going to invite you to say a few words, Alan. And I guess your topic focus today is how organizations are approaching scaling their cybersecurity incident response, including the use of security automation and machine learning. Feel free to adapt that and take it away.
Yeah, given the makeup, I'll have to maybe refactor some of my slides on the fly here.
Yep, my name is Alan Rogers. I work over in Cambridge at the inside the security division of IBM. That happens to be IBM Security headquarters actually right over near Kendall. I got into cybersecurity, to answer that question, Vivek, kind of very much by chance. Thank you. I got out of college, I had a double E degree, as you said. I did minor in computer science, and I was focused on massively parallel processing. This was back in the early 90s, so it wasn't a thing really yet. And I went to work for DuPont in their Central Research Division, and I was working for this really kind of crazy, what you would imagine as the crazy professor, right? The hair everywhere, all these crazy ideas, and the internet was really just starting to take off. I know it's hard to imagine for some of the younger people in the room. And he had this idea that we're gonna need firewalls to help protect our networks. And this was actually an early thought. And back in that day, if you wanted to have a firewall, you went and got a toolkit that you built a firewall by yourself. So we went off and built the firewall, and timing was good. Just so happened to take off, and that was called the Raptor Firewall, and it was one of the really the only first application with a firewall. And then, of course, many followed, and ultimately Cisco and Check Point took over that market. But it was good, run for a while. And then after a while, I realized, you know what, we spent a lot of time trying to harden the perimeter and keeping the bad guys out, and clearly it wasn't completely effective. So then we turned our attention to, okay, if you can't protect the perimeter, then you need to have the protection travel with the content. So we moved into and created a company around digital rights management, but for enterprise content, so that you could harden the content itself and not have to worry about the perimeter. And that ultimately got bought by EMC, and actually this is still in use inside of EMC today as a product that they sell. And then finally, after that, the realization, okay, even that's not getting the problem solved because that's not always applicable. We can't prevent it, certainly. We're struggling to even identify issues when they happen. Let's try to help organizations at least respond to it. And that's kind of the three legs of the stool: protect, detect, and then respond. So for the last 8 years, I've been focused on helping organizations dealing with how they respond to cyber attacks, which is just as important as protecting themselves from cyber attacks. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, and I will, given the kind of the numbers here, I'll try to kind of keep it somewhat high level, and happy to dig into as much details as you'd like. Okay?
That sounds
appropriate? Perfect. Okay, great. So, as I said, the last 8 years we've been working with a variety of organizations, from very small companies, excuse me, but more commonly large enterprises, because our software happens to be fairly expensive, typically used by large companies: Facebook, Visa, MasterCard, many of the big banks, very large enterprises who have a lot to be concerned about. And over those 8 years, I've learned a lot from a lot of other smart people. And I've learned, actually, that's the best way. Be around smart people is a bit more important than being smart yourself. And as I've kind of worked with them, and of course we sell a product and have built a product to help in this space as well, and I'm not going to talk specifically about the product, but more about the space. What I've kind of learned from these people is that the challenges that they face today kind of fall into three. I like to break it down into three categories because I can digest it easier that way. First and foremost is the people problem. And the slide here, I don't know if you can read it, it references a Ponemon report, which is a report that comes out annually. And in that report, 75% of the people that responded identified that hiring technical staff for cybersecurity is their /1 challenge. And in fact, there's an expectation that by the year 2021, there will be a 3.5 million person shortfall in cybersecurity skills. There will be that many cybersecurity jobs that we cannot fill because there are not enough people to do it. So clearly this is a massive challenge, and the challenge that across the board, any CISO that you talk to, Chief Security Officer, will probably state as their /1. Acquiring and retaining the necessary skills to protect their environment.
Why is it so hard?
Shortage. There's just not enough people with the training necessary to do it. So that's kind of the people side. The next key area that I kind of lump things into is process. Despite the fact that we are generally staffed by engineers who tend to be very kind of methodical, they've been trained, right, and beaten into them. There's a process, follow a process, right, and analytically, analyze what you're doing. I find that cybersecurity incident responses is still very much a black art. Everybody does it differently. They've got their favorite tools, and it becomes very hard to measure and improve and manage the IR process when it's not, when it's so ad hoc. And in fact, again, referencing the SANS survey, 62% of the respondents to the survey did not assume that there was more than 100 incidents that they were not able to or not aware of in their environments in 2018. And 32% of them actually had no idea how many incidents they had or had missed. So clearly, a lot of broken process in terms of even understanding the nature of the problem that they're trying to solve. And then finally, from a technology perspective, it's not that we don't have enough technology or even that our technology is not good enough. Quite honestly, the biggest challenge enterprises are facing, they've got too much technology. You'll hear a number kicked around that the average security operations center, an analyst working in a SOC, has access to 80 different technologies from 40 different vendors. How in the world does somebody become proficient in 80 different technologies? It's just impossible. So those are the key challenges that have come out. In terms of how do we address that, I'll just touch quickly and say, from a people perspective, I really think it's two things. First and foremost, it's training and mentoring your organization. This problem is not going to go away. You're not going to be able to easily hire the people you need. You need to come up with ways to internally train those people. You need to invest in a process for how you build those skills internally. But then secondly, you need to make sure you're employing them in an environment where they feel empowered and want to stay. Because as soon as they're trained, they're marketable, and somebody else is trying to get them. And the other key thing I would say in this space is we need to really focus on separating the noise, or filtering out the noise. There is such an onslaught of security alerts coming at the analysts who are trying to solve these problems. There's no way they can possibly address them all. From a process perspective, it's really all about repeatability. I mentioned it earlier. IR process tends to be a very ad hoc process. In order to improve something, you need to measure it. In order to measure it, you need to have a methodical tool for doing so. And there's a variety of tools out there to do it. Some are more purpose-built, but at the very least, make sure that you have a defined process and a way to track that. And then finally, from a technology perspective, really the opportunity here to address the technology problem is all around automation. Automation is what allows you to take a well-defined process once you understand it and accelerate it. But it's and there's a lot of automation tools out there in the market today. Again, we have a product, many other great products out there. The only thing I would say is the number one factor that I face when I talk to other clients about it is just try to enforce the idea that make sure you understand your process, you refine your process, and then look for opportunities to go about automating that process. So I liken it to a race. It doesn't matter how fast you can run. If you're not running in the right direction, you're not going to get to the finish line. So, you know what? I have other slides, but it could, given the time that we have, I'm going to go ahead and stop here.
You are? Okay.
You think I should cover a little more? Or?
I think you've got a lot more to share.
Okay.
Maybe with this as unfortunately, microphone up. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but since I'm sitting in the moderator chair, I can express a point of view. I've sort of taken a sneak peek. A lot of it, I will have to confess, went over my head, but you've got a lot more to share. There's a lot more work you do, and maybe even just a couple of slides to give our members of the audience a little bit of a further insight into what kind of work you do as a for instance, and maybe even just visual and a little bit of an audio trail, and we can come back and dig deeper later. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, fair enough. Just a couple more minutes in here. All right, so I've kind of laid out the problem here and the areas that I think people need to focus on. So what I would say is this has been a kind of evolutionary, this industry is in a very evolutionary state. And what we have basically, and this is not lost by the likes of Gartner and those as well, what has been noticed is that there are really three varying technologies that the more mature security operations centers, or SOCs, are pulling together today to help address this problem. And it's been coined by Gartner, an analyst firm. They've coined this the SOAR market: security, orchestration, automation, and response. And what they observed in these large organizations is what used to be three very distinct product groups. There was this area called security incident response platforms, kind of purpose-built case management tools for cybersecurity. There is this concept of threat intelligence platforms, and I think, Chandra, you'll probably touch a little bit on this as well. And I'd be interested in your thoughts about kind of the evolution and merging of these technologies. And then finally, there's these security automation platforms, things that help you automate tasks that humans used to do or typically would do. And what Gartner recognized is that the industry was starting to pull these technologies together in their SOCs and try to create a blended type of product that would allow them to begin to address those problems that I discussed on the last slide. And of course, the vendors recognize this as well, our team being one of them, and as all of our competitors, and have now started to kind of pull in technologies, capabilities from those other areas and try to create a blended solution to address all of these areas at the same time. So what I end up doing when I talk about this, for me, it's more useful, rather than talking about the industry or the product spaces, actually talk about the technologies or capabilities that you need to have when you think about improving your security posture as it relates to responding to cyber attacks. And it really comes down, in my mind, to these three product areas. And I'll just touch on them briefly, and then we can take questions, later on in the program. First and foremost is case management. You need to have a methodical way. Anytime you're dealing with an environment where you're addressing or responding to cyber attacks, you need to have a repeatable way to track and monitor that. As I said before, the only way you can improve something is really if you can measure it. The only way you can improve it intelligently. And a purpose-built case management platform for dealing with cyber attacks gives you a lot of advantages. It allows you to track everything in a methodical way. It allows you to build metrics. It allows you to, again, it feeds into some of the other capabilities I'll talk about in terms of automation and orchestration and so forth. So that's kind of the basic blocking and tackling that you need to build your foundation on. The second area I lump into is really about intelligence. When I talk about intelligence, I'm talking about leveraging human intelligence, leveraging threat intelligence, and leveraging now more increasingly machine learning and artificial intelligence. So from a human intelligence perspective, it's really about capturing the knowledge of your brightest people and putting it into a format or a form factor that can be used by your more junior people. And that's part of the training process as well. And this typically comes in the form of something like a playbook. We can now begin to build out playbooks that say, okay, when I have a malware infestation of this characteristic, these are the steps that I know I need to walk through to effectively remediate that issue. And again, if you get your team together and mine the smarts of your brightest people, you can build playbooks that effectively will guide a more junior analyst through that process. From a threat intelligence perspective, again, I think we'll talk some more about this. There's a wealth of threat intelligence out there already. There's a whole industry around what are known bad IP addresses, where are the command and control servers for malware, what are the MD5 hashes of known malware. All of this stuff is available. The problem is making it actionable. So this capability, in terms of this triumphant of capabilities, allows you to automatically take an example of an issue that you're suffering, compare it against threat intelligence that's available out in the world, and make sure that and quickly determine what's meaningful and what's not. Is this a well-known attack? Is this isolated to me, or is it actually innocuous? AI with automation, like, okay, based on the machine learning algorithm. This is considered to be a high priority. That particular asset that seems to be affected is in fact a low, maybe, depending on its criticality, you can make decisions about, do I automatically quarantine that from the network? You can begin to automate that and thread it all together. So that's kind of the high-level pitch of kind of the space that I work in and what I see people in the industry doing today as it relates to kind of cutting-edge cybersecurity incident response. Okay?
Fantastic. Great. Thanks so much, Alan. So next up, we're just going to continue to go around the circle here. Charlie, if you could share a little bit more about your background and how you came to be in this box in cybersecurity. It was a broad category. And I understand you're going to be talking about next-gen trusted infrastructures and platforms and a little bit more about Keyline, right?
Yep. So I think yours was a good segue. Perfectly goes into that.
Awesome.
So at least for me, I started out mostly doing web development and doing security and web development. And I got more into like reconfigurable computing with FPGAs, CPLDs, just like chips you can reconfigure. So it has the speed benefits of hardware. You still have the programming like software has. From there, at Georgia Tech, as you were describing, for my PhD, I went into semiconductors and semiconductor fabrication. And so we worked on beta voltaic batteries, trying to figure out how to develop batteries that have long lives. So it would be 100 plus years for the lifespan of the battery, but it's very low power, so it's very low power for long term. So it'd be like space applications, or especially with reconfigurable computing, where it's like a hard to reach place, like under bridges where you don't want to change the batteries a lot, you don't want to run power out. You just have a long-term battery on that. So it tied in nicely with the reconfigurable computing aspect. And then after I graduated, I continued on doing cybersecurity and cryptography-related things at Lincoln Laboratory, and that's where I started working on the Keyline Project. And so the Keyline Project had already been a good bit developed at the time. It started a year or so before I started at the lab. But we added on, made it a little bit stronger, made it a bit cleaner and user-friendly. And we kind of went around the country kind of presenting for the Department of Homeland Security, who funds our project, to kind of get the word out about our project, because it was a federally funded project. And as an effort to try to make it so that the technologies don't just sit on the shelves that were developed by the government, we try to get them out to use them either in industry or just like startups, or even like back into the government again, so the government picks up projects that have already been developed and kind of modernized. Yeah.
Are startups able to license in technology from Lincoln Labs through you?
At least for Keyline, it's open source and free software, so there's no licensing in terms of like a contractual licensing, other than just like the normal open source licensing. For other projects at the lab, we do like patents and licensing for those. So that would go through MIT to do those kinds of licensing.
Of the TLO?
Yeah. Right, so today we're going to be going into a bit on Keyline and what Keyline is, and why it's important to address at least a little subset of the issues that Alan got into, and in terms of also the dynamic networks and being able to isolate different things in the network as they go bad and automatically detecting what's happening. So we'll go into a bit on Keyline, and we'll discuss a little bit on that background, also the problem area. So Keyline in general is a key bootstrapping and integrity management software architecture that we developed at the lab. So it's designed to put secrets into the cloud securely, and then to make sure that your machines are trustworthy and they stay trustworthy, to make sure that someone doesn't break in and steal the secrets out that you put in. And it's designed, as you mentioned, on a hardware-root trust. So we'll get into that in a little bit on what that is, but essentially it's a hardware chip in the computer that we can use as a strong identity to make sure that we know who we're talking to and to get information into the computer.
And just one clarifying question, and I know we're as a group suspending Q&A until later, but did you say already, and I might have missed it, that this is a research project, and while you've gone around evangelizing, it is still a federally funded research project that you're encouraging adoption, but hasn't been widely adopted yet. So this is a point of view that has been developed that you're now evangelizing as well. Is that true?
We'll go into the transitions that we've done
You will. Okay.
later on, but
Okay.
it has been used in various projects around, and we're also working with the open source community to kind of integrate it into Fedora. So we're hoping by the end of the year we'll be able to get that in. I don't think it's, the Fedora part is in the slide, but I can mention that when we get to that. Okay, so we'll talk about the need for why we need security in the cloud. So again, as Alan had mentioned a lot before about all the scary things with cybersecurity out there, essentially everything is moving into the cloud these days, and that's not just industry, but it's also consumers, and also the government is making a move into the cloud. But a lot of people are kind of worried and hesitant to move into the cloud with all the scary attacks and everything you're seeing all the time with data exfiltration and attacks on their cloud services. So people are really cautiously waiting until they feel it's safe to move all their data into the cloud. But some people have already proactively made the step to start moving into the cloud, or at least specialized enclaves in the cloud that, for instance, the government can use that's a bit more protected. But essentially, the idea is that we need to be able to deploy apps and secrets into the cloud, and we need to make sure that we can trust that the cloud's protecting it and it hasn't been compromised. So let's go into a little bit on the Keyline approach on how we're pulling this off. So essentially, the idea, as I said, is that we want to make sure that we're starting out in a good state before we put our secrets into the cloud, and then we stay in a good state going from there. So essentially, the first thing we want to do is make sure that the machine isn't already compromised before we put our secrets into the machine. The second thing is we want to securely put the secrets into the machine so they can't be stolen while we're provisioning our secrets into the machine. And then the third is to detect if the machine becomes compromised after our secrets are in the machine. And what would be really nice is if this works in a virtualized environment, like you see in a lot of clouds today, or on bare metal as well, so you can just run it directly on hardware instead of in the virtual area. And the way this is done today typically is through proprietary technology. So this is pretty much like a black box approach, where the cloud provider says, trust us, we're doing all the security stuff, and we're doing all of our patches and security updates, and you just kind of take their word for it, but there's really no way to verify on your end that everything's up to date and patched, and that there's no malware running into the deeper layers of the software. Another possibility is with certification. So this could be, for instance, FedRAMP, which is where essentially an organization goes out and they analyze the software, or they analyze the implementation, and they say this matches with what our requirements are, and it looks trustworthy, so they give it a stamp of approval. But you're still kind of taking their word for it that everything's good and it stays good, and that they're continuing to keep up with all those updates. And the third is, of course, contracts, where essentially you're just signing a contract with a company where if they don't do what they said they're doing, then you can just sue them for money and try to get damages out that way. But it's still not a technical solution to ensure that what's actually happening is what's happening. All right, so the next question is, if we want to start in a good state and stay in a good state, when do we actually start to trust the machine? So the way this works today is essentially when you're given a machine, you're establishing what's called a root of trust at that point in time. So when they give you your machine, when you put your information into the machine and you start to bootstrap it, you're essentially saying that this state of the machine is trustworthy. Everything in the machine is in a good state, and I trust the machine. And then essentially you go from there, monitoring forward to make sure that the machine is staying in a good state, using software like anti-malware detection and just file integrity checking. But what this fails to take into account is all the stuff that's happening before you're even given the machine in the first place. So it could be everything all the way down to the hardware level. So you have firmware that's running from the hardware, you have a hypervisor for virtualized environments, and you have the cloud stack configuration software, so all the software the cloud provider gives you to run, you have to kind of trust all that stuff is trustworthy. And this is essentially all the black box as far as you're concerned, because you have no idea anything that's happening before you were given the machine. So essentially the goal is to take that hardware, or that root of trust, and move it back as far as possible, preferably to the hardware level. And we do this with something called a Trusted Platform Module, which we'll get to in a second. But essentially what this does is it allows us to move that root of trust back as early on as possible in that boot up phase. And then we can tie that going forward from there in order to make sure the machine stays in a good state all the way up through the application layer. So again, we're trying to start out in a good state and stay in a good state doing this technique. And the way we do this is through, as I said, the Trusted Platform Module. So what the Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, is it's a commodity hardware chip that's available in most laptops out there today. So I think most of the laptops that you have probably already has a TPM chip in it. And essentially, it's a ubiquitous chip that's very cheap, and we can depend on it as being there. We don't need to evangelize to have people adopt it. We don't need to convince people to install it. It's just already there to use. It's very convenient that way. But essentially what that chip is going to do is allows us to answer two important questions. The first is, which machine am I talking to? And it does this through a cryptographic endorsement key that's burned into the chip at the time that it's manufactured. So essentially, this chip is very difficult to remove from the chip, or the key is difficult to remove from the chip, and it's difficult to tamper with. So it's designed to be a strong root of trust that we can use as an identity of the machine. And also, since it's a cryptographic key, it can be used for signing secrets, so that you know if you're receiving information that it came from that actual machine, you can trust it. The second thing this TPM chip will do for us is it allows us to answer the question of, will the machine do the right thing? And by doing the right thing, what we mean is integrity checking. So essentially the way this works is that when the machine first boots up, one of the first components that starts up in the boot up process, so for instance like the BIOS, it will take a hash of the next component before it hands control over to it, and it'll store that securely in the TPM chip. And then the next component will measure the next component before handing control, and so on and so forth. So every component gets measured all the way up the stack, and it's securely stored in the TPM. And this forms essentially a hash chain, or a chain of hashes that you can tie back to the original, so they can check and see if any of these has been tampered with or is not trustworthy. And again, since the TPM stores a cryptographic key, it can then sign that hash chain and present it to a third party in order to allow you to remotely attest that the machine is in good state. So you essentially will hand over that hash chain to a remote third party. It'll make sure the signature is valid, that it's tied to that TPM chip, and then it'll look through the hash chain and make sure that all the components are what we expect them to be and that they're all trustworthy. All right, so at this point it sounds like this is a solved problem. We already have a TPM chip that's ubiquitous. Everyone already has it pretty much in their computers today. And we already have kind of a technique for doing remote attestation where you have that hash chain I mentioned that's already a pretty widely adopted technique on doing this. So you might be wondering why it's not already done in today and why you're not seeing this in the cloud as a solution. And there have been a couple of challenges that have been preventing the adoption in the cloud. The first is complexity. A lot of the software stacks out there that cloud providers give to you, as well as your own software that you put into the cloud, it needs to be TPM aware, so it needs to be able to communicate with the TPM in order to be able to carry out this process. So a lot of people would have to rewrite their software, or the cloud providers would need to provide that in their software, so they'd have to make changes behind the scenes so that it's happening. And so obviously that's going to add a lot of overhead. People don't have to redo all their software to use it, so it's been really hampering the adoption. The second is performance. Again, the chip is not designed to be an accelerator for cryptography. It's designed to be a cheap commodity chip that's in everybody's computers, so it's not very fast at all. A single cryptographic operation takes about a full second to do. So you can imagine if you have thousands of machines, you need to do this, it slows things down a lot. So it's not really scalable to cloud sizes. If you have a lot of machines, you need to ensure the integrity of. And then the third is that the virtualized environment support for TPMs is very poor at the moment. There are some hypervisors out there that will provide TPM support, but it's still in its early phases. It's not very well adopted yet. So that's kind of hampering the cloud adoption because most clouds out there are virtualized. They're not on hardware. You're actually renting a machine itself. You're just renting space in a virtualized environment on that machine. So between all of these, it's kind of been holding back the ability to be able to use this technique in order to do the security. So the way that we've solved these problems with Keyline is with the Keyline solution. So essentially with Keyline, it allows us to transparently work behind the scenes in order to provide this functionality. So you don't need to modify any of your software to be TPM aware. It'll just work in the background with whatever you have, whatever you put in there. As well as with the provider software stack, you don't have to make any customizations to that either. It's also very performant. We've done lots of research and benchmarking with various groups that have implemented Keyline. And we've shown that it can do integrity checking for, we'll see in a second, but it's thousands of nodes very easily, and it scales up linearly, so it can easily handle the workloads that you would see in the cloud. And then finally, it's cloud integrated. Again, the issue of working on bare metal on an actual machine or in a virtual environment, it works either way, so it'll seamlessly work between the two without an issue. All right, so as you might imagine, being able to implement something like this takes a whole bunch of crypto. It's really nasty to go into. So I'll save all those details and not really dive into that. But I want to give you kind of an overview of exactly what's working from a really like 10,000 foot level, just to get the general idea. So first we'll go into the cast of characters of Keyline. So there's 4 components in the Keyline architecture. On the far left is the tenant, and the tenant is essentially going to be like you or the person that is actually doing the provisioning into the machine. So you're the one that's actually trying to put secrets into the cloud. On the top we see is the cloud verifier, and the cloud verifier is the thing that's actually doing the integrity checking. So it's going to be actually checking all the cloud nodes to make sure they're in a good state and that they haven't been tampered with or they're not in an invalid or error state. And the third component is the registrar. Essentially, this is a store of all of the TPM public keys that are in our environment. So when we're given a machine, the machine registers itself and puts its TPM public key. So let's say the tenant has a secret key that it wants to put into the cloud node. So the first thing the tenant's going to do is it'll split the key into 2 halves. And it does this cryptographically, so you can't just simply guess what the other side of the key is with only half the key. And then it's going to send both halves of those keys off. One is going to go to the verifier, and the other is going to go to the cloud node directly. And the reason why we split between the two, instead of just giving all the keys over to the cloud verifier, is that we want to follow the principle of least privilege, where we don't want to just give all our secrets over to an entity that doesn't need to have the secrets or use the secrets, because then it ends up with a giant stockpile of all of our secrets, and as soon as someone attacks that, then they get all of our secrets, and it's obviously not a good thing. So we're going to split the key in half. Only half of it will go to the verifier, and the other half will go to the cloud node. And this allows us to explicitly bring up a specific machine. That way, if something happens with the cloud verifier where it accidentally gives out the half a key to multiple machines that we don't want to bring up, they have no way of actually getting the other half unless we explicitly give it to that machine. So we have explicit intent that we only want to allow this specific machine to have that key. So essentially what will happen after those 2 key halves are given to the verifier and the cloud nodes is the cloud verifier is going to check the integrity of the node to make sure that it matches the integrity state it expects to see. So it'll basically scan through that list of hashes and check against a whitelist of what it expects is good whitelist hashes. It'll then check with the registrar to make sure the TPM keys match something that we expect to be seeing. So it's not just some fake TPM giving out quotes. And then if everything looks good, it'll hand the half of the key over to the cloud node. So now, of course, the cloud node has both halves of the key, and it can recombine them to obtain that original secret. So here we've seen that we can securely bootstrap the secrets from the tenant into the cloud nodes, where only the cloud nodes and the tenant need to have that full key. No one else in the system needs to have the full key, so we've securely provisioned without having to divulge that secret over to anyone else. All right, so now that we know that we've started out in a good state and that we've been able to give our secrets over securely, the second step is to make sure the machine stays in a good state and it doesn't become compromised and then somebody steals the secret out of it after we've given it to it. So that's where the integrity monitoring portion comes in. So essentially the way this works is that after the secret's already been given over, the cloud verifier just continuously checks the integrity state of the node over and over and over again. And this essentially is the same as the boot up process. Essentially, it's just going to keep doing that over and over to make sure that it's still in a good state. And of course, it'll check with the registrar to make sure the keys are still good and expected. And as long as everything is good, and it keeps on going about its business and nothing happens really. But now let's say that some malware starts to run on the cloud nodes. Now when the verifier tries to do the integrity states of the cloud nodes, there will be an invalid hash inside that list of hashes because the malware is not on the list of expected software. At that point, the integrity check in the cloud verifier will fail, and it will then be able to alert the tenant that something has gone wrong with that node. And it can also take automated action, so it can securely shut down the node, for instance, if you want a program to do that, or it can do a kind of adaptive network isolation, where it can just isolate that node from the network to prevent it from being able to communicate with any other node in the network. So that's touching a little on, as you were saying, Alan, with the kind of adaptive networking where you can isolate the machines as they come up. Right, and essentially, now that we've seen that we can securely provision the machine and we know it's in a good state when we start, and it stays in a good state, the last question is this going to be performant and will it scale well in the cloud? And as I mentioned, we've done lots of testing with various partners that we've been working with over the years on Keyline, and we've seen that we can securely bootstrap a key into the cloud in less than 2 seconds. And we can also do integrity measurement or integrity violation detections in as little as 110 milliseconds. So you can very quickly check and see if something has gone wrong on that machine, and then you can quickly react and isolate that node or shut it down in order to prevent any kind of spread of malware or exfiltration of data on the system. Also, as I mentioned, Keyline is very scalable. So essentially, we've seen that we can run 10,000 nodes for a single cloud verifier every 4 seconds. And it scales linearly. So if you want to do 20,000 nodes every 4 seconds, you just add a second verifier in, and then it can just keep scaling up from there. So it scales very nicely in the clouds, easily handling tens of thousands of cloud nodes. And so we'll just do a quick overview of the benefits. Essentially, what's out there today doesn't really give you the ability to check and make sure on your own that the cloud is actually as trustworthy as it's supposed to be. It's kind of like a black box situation where you just trust other people's words and you're trusting that they're actually doing what they say they're doing, they're providing that security. But Keyline allows you to be able to see inside the machine and see everything that's running on the machine from the hardware up to the software, everything that's viewable in the system to make sure everything is in a good state. And again, it integrates into the system very nicely in a cloud environment. It can work on virtual environments or bare metal, so direct machine. And it can work with any of your software as it is. You don't have to make customizations or changes in order to make that work. And it's very quick and performant, as we've seen. It scales very easily. All right, so a little bit about what we've done so far. Keyline is free open source software. It is available on our public GitHub. And that URL is outdated, but it will redirect you to the correct place because we've handed over ownership of it to the open source community. And with the help of Red Hat, they're kind of helping us to build out a community around Keyline. And we're hoping that by the end of this year, we'll have Keyline in the actual official package management of the Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux as well. So you'll be able to install and use Keyline very easily just by doing normal like Yum repository installs, for instance.
Will it work in Ubuntu as well?
You can install it from GitHub with Ubuntu, but we don't have that in the package management integrated. So far, it's only working with Fedora and the RHEL related. Yeah.
Does this extend writing to the containers?
Sorry, can I interrupt you for a second? And I know I've been allowing you to jump in, and you need to hold any other questions until the Q&A. But seriously, I feel like it will help us if we give all our panelists a chance just to kind of get their initial, to wade into the topic from their perspective. So if you can hold your question, again, I don't mean to cut it off, we'd love to hear from you, but let's just complete the round, go around the table, and then we'll come back and really just open it up. And thank you very much, appreciate it, and to you as well. So go ahead, I'll give you a chance to wrap up.
Yep, I think it's the last slide. But essentially with another kind of partner we've been working with over the years is the Massachusetts Open Cloud Initiative. And this is work that's going on with Northeastern and BU as well. And essentially they're building a public cloud offering for the state of Massachusetts. And the thing that kind of sets it apart from all the other clouds out there is that it's designed to be a bare metal environment. So you're actually getting a physical machine, not just like a virtualized sliver of a machine. And you have full control over that machine. And you still get all the benefits of a virtual environment. So you can pause the machines, you can take snapshots and then roll back, load snapshots up and stuff like that. So it's very flexible and powerful. And Keyline is one of the security components of the Massachusetts Open Cloud. So you can actually use that as part of the Massachusetts Open Cloud. If you receive a machine from them, then you can run Keyline and check the integrity of the machines. But of course, we're also looking for any kind of recommendations or feedback on Keyline or places that we can improve or enhancements, new features, that kind of stuff. It is open source and free software on GitHub, so we're always taking pull requests or feature additions if you might have it. And the contact information for Nabil Shir and I, Nabil and I have been working on this for a few years now, so we're happy to see it kind of growing and progressing. So, thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And so we're going to hear from you, Chandra. We waited patiently, but appreciate that. And with that, let's make sure we got the right deck up, and you've got the clicker, right?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just I'll mention a little bit about Seceon. So we started Seceon 4.5 years back, and as Alan pointed out, most of the problems you saw that 75% of the issues does not get even resolved, as he pointed out. And then the same time, the big organizations, I'm not sure whether you guys are able to hear me. Big organizations have those, he pointed out 80 plus tools out there, but then there are like organizations, those ones struggle with all the noise they have to deal with. They don't know what to do with even those tools, 80 plus tools. They are giving them the data, the shortage of people are there, and then even they are not able to pull all of them together to make it actionable. Because one of the keywords you are hearing from him all the time, and we will talk in a lot more details about is how you take the data and make it actionable instead of being just like bogged down into the noises. So that is the story with the people who have a lot of budget. They have hired a lot of people and they bought those 80 plus tools out there they have deployed in their organization. But there is like 99.7% organization, they don't have those tools as well. And it does not mean that they do not care about cybersecurity, because just to give you an idea, if you have a breach, there's so much losses. A lot of those SMB organizations, they get out of the business because of the challenges they have to overcome after the breach happens. And then the trust get lost with the customers and all that. It's very hard for them to recover from that. So we'll talk about that, how we got started and what we have done to bridge the gap between that cybersecurity issue as well, because the bigger ones are still struggling big time, but what about those SME and SMBs who does not have hundreds of millions into the budget? How you want to make sure they keep on focusing on their own business instead of just worrying about cybersecurity and getting kind of like out of the business once in a while they get hit. And they are the target right now for many of the issues right now happening. So these are some of the challenges which Alan talked about as well, that sophistication is kind of keep on increasing. And the reason for sophistication is very simple, because as you hear the machine learning and artificial intelligence automations happening into other part of the industry, same thing is now available to the cyber criminals as well. So they can automate and let the machine go and do the attack. They don't have to sit down and keep on going after each and every of those alerts to send it out and the wait and see what is happening in there. They can send millions and millions, and they can have a compute to kind of go and mine billions of the data points and places where they can be collecting the data out from. Similarly, means like you have a lot of tools, and they are also, means like as he pointed out, there are 70. Just to give you an idea, some organization have 208 cybersecurity products. Those people come out and they talk that I have spending $600 million per year, somebody is spending $800 million, 1,600 people in the organization working in the cybersecurity, and still they get breached and they don't know about it. And they will learn from it from the outside when the data is being sold into the dark web. Similarly, growing number of the devices and environment means like to protect. So now when we are talking about the devices, you have like so many devices, you've got IoT, you have smart devices, you are bringing into the organizations. Virtualization now created many other hosts out there. But at the same time, as far as your environment, now you are on-prem, you are cloud, people are working from the remote, mobile, all of those things are kind of also increasing the number of the places where your breach can happen out there as well. As he pointed out, Alan pointed out, he said very well that in the beginning, his life started with the perimeter, and that was the security. It's like when you were talking about early 90s, in the internet world, if you made something packet go from point A to point B, you kind of like celebrated that. That's right. Nobody thought that, hey, this is going to enable so much kind of commerce and all the banking. Who thought that you'll be doing your banking, all the transactions will be happening on it? So the perimeters were the one which kind of you started with, and then it has been kind of like, it has served some of purpose, it still serves it, but that is not your cybersecurity anymore. That is just like, we'll talk a little bit more about it. What are those? Those are part of the hygienes. That's right. And then the same thing you're talking about the qualified peoples. He talked about that. It's like, hey, there is a shortage of that 3.5 million cybersecurity professional by 2021. You cannot hire. You can go advertise it, and he pointed out that you can train your people. By the time they are trained, somebody else will scoop them because they want them. And then you are back to the same position where you were before. And the compliance. Now you see that compliance is growing everywhere. Whether in the US we are talking, California came up with its own just recently in their GDPR, and many others are going to be keep on coming, how to handle the data and all that. And some of the problems are created by people mining the data for their benefits as well, because you guys keep on hearing there is a lot of hearing end up happening in the Congress and everywhere else, because your data is being mined. Because as you are on the smart devices, somebody is taking your data and they're making money off of it, and that data is not protected. It kind of get out there, and all of a sudden everybody is compromised. So that challenge, people, it's not that it was intention that, hey, I will just have somebody's data go out, but it's happening in there because there's not enough thought was put together to how to secure that. And then cyber crime as a service. Now you can go and hire these things out there. You can pay a few dollars and you can get the people to kind of like give you set of hundreds of machines, sometimes thousands of machines to go DDoS something, or send the malware or ransomware. All of these things are happening each and every moment. And one of the things I want to make sure, cybersecurity, when you are in the digital world, there is no weekend. There is no holiday, there is no vacation. You are on it and you can be attacked any moment, So these are the challenges, you are seeing it out there. But then how can you will hear a lot of these variations when you hear in the news, when you read into the news, most of the time you will hear that, hey, it was like ransomware, malware, or somebody's compromised credentials in there. And then some IT mistakes. You will hear that IT person made a mistake in there, and that's why that things was exposed. Means these days you are hearing a lot of S3 buckets have been kind of like left open, and people have been able to go in and dump the data or pull out the data and all that in there. That's right. So if you look into any of those kind of like threats right now you have to deal with, or you read the news, it falls into one of these categories out there. And what we do once again is like we handle those categories and we always continuously enhance the hygiene, because we have a better intelligence, because context and situational awareness, we go and push the policy and keep on improving them as well. So your hygiene is never perfect. That has to be keep on improved as you are kind of like a new threats are coming in there, and that's what we end up doing. Okay, so that's what the Seceon does in nutshell. Okay, and that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. I didn't mean to, again, I just to make sure that we can keep the conversation flowing as well. In some ways, it's sort of hard to know, and this is a great moment to open it up and invite all of you to chime in, and let's get some conversation started. Go ahead.
Vivek from GE. So question for Charles. How do you trust the TPM chip? How do you know that hasn't been hacked?
Yeah, so a lot of these are made in like foreign countries, and so it's kind of, it's a little bit iffier there, but there are, I guess you just have to look at the supply chain and see where it was designed, where it came from, and you could even, at least for the government perspective, you could just have your own root of trust chips, even if it's not like a TPM specifically. For industry, it depends on, you have to just look where they're coming from and make sure it's someone that you at least trust to make your chips. But yeah, especially with like hardware trojans and everything, it can be kind of scary about trusting that kind of stuff. But
So my question was, does the Keyline extend related to the containers like Kubernetes or Docker?
so for the runtime support, we rely on something that's built into the Linux kernel called the Integrity Measurement Architecture. So essentially, it does have like really early support to be able to do introspection into the containers, but it's not super mature at this point. So from Keyline's perspective, all we care about is what's in the TPM, because that's what's being sent to the Keyline verifier. So as long as there's some type of software that's checking what's running in the containers, like whenever something executes in a container, as long as there's something that's storing that into the TPM, then we'd be able to check that. So either like really early beta kind of things in the integrity measurement, or if you have your own software that does that kind of checking that's built into containers, you could do that. But
Charles, this is Tejpal Garwal. I have a question about the integration mechanism or the integrity mechanism where it continuously tests the integrity of the keys. So is there any performance degradation in that scenario you could see? Or I can think of, because it's continuous, checking the integrity. So I would think of performance.
at least from the nodes perspective, most of the work that's being done is in the TPM chip itself. So essentially, you're just asking the TPM to package up everything you have and send it. So the node itself isn't really doing much work. It's just the TPM that's kind of working all the time and churning away.
And another question I have about the TPM itself, the encryption mechanism that we are using. I assume it will be AES 128 or 256. And we know that all the encryption mechanisms have been hacked or broken. What do you think, since it's a hardware-based TPM, and I can clearly see that I can steal the hardware as a bad guy. So if that means I can compromise entire ecosystem of TPM, if that thing ever to happen. What have you thought about that mechanism? If your TPMs are compromised, how would you protect, or what is the protection mechanism you have put in place?
Yeah, so for, at least for compromising the TPM, at least TPM 2.0, which is in most laptops today, the older one isn't really, you don't see it anymore. But the newer one supports even elliptic curve cryptography and RSA, so it's the strongest protocols that are available at least. And if there are bugs, most of that's implemented in firmware in the chip. So you could always do a firmware patch from the vendor to make sure it gets fixed. Also with Keyline, you can target specific public keys for TPM chips. So if you're really paranoid, you can actually have a list of TPMs that you know are trustworthy. And then it would come down to physical security to make sure that your hardware doesn't get stolen, or someone doesn't walk off with a server or something, just to make sure that any of those don't get exfiltrated. And then you can kind of just blacklist that one or not trust it any longer.
Charles, I have looks like everybody's intrigued with the technology and then everything that you are building. It's obviously interest to a lot of folks here. The question that I have is, first of all, with the advent of the cloud technology, it's changing every day. First, when I build my application, I don't even know. I'm elastically growing and then condensing and other based on my need. So I don't even know what VM that I'm going to be instantiating to run my application. That's one. The next one is obviously with the containers, and especially if you are using the container as a service and all the stuff, you don't even know what VM where it is going to be running. The lifespan of these things probably could be sometimes minutes, even seconds. And then now with the function as a service, you are seeing the similar kind of a challenges. These instances of these things could be a microsecond, millisecond. So I was wondering, when you consider all these things, is it even actually a viable solution to be able to actually do this checking the integrity of the solution? That's my first question.
Yeah, that's a good question. The first, so at least in terms of the fast changing, what you're using in terms of hardware and everything, you could, especially if it's a government application, if you have your own TPM kind of manufacturing, or if you're able to set your own keys, which a lot of TPMs allow you to do, they allow you to set your own keys into the TPM. It's a one-time fuse, so it can only be set and you can never change it after that. But if you can do that, then you can have your own list of keys that you can trust, and then any of those keys would be trustworthy, so you could cycle through as many as you want, as quickly as you want, and they would all be valid and trustworthy. And with Keyline, you could blacklist if something goes wrong or somebody steals a machine or something, you can just remove that from the list. So at least in that sense, it'll be able to flexibly be able to hold kind of a wide variety of TPM machines that you have. And for the software portion, at least with the integrity, with the IMA, the integrity measurement architecture, essentially it's going to check to see if it's seen that running before. So if you have a container that has software running in it, it'll see if it's already seen that in the past, the actual measurement of that piece of software. And if it's already seen it, it won't re-store it in the TPM, it'll only store it once. And so if you have 1,000 containers being spun up over and over, as long as they all are running the same exact image, then none of them will affect the TPM. So it should be able to just easily handle that. If one starts up with a different version or starts up with something that's been tampered with, then it will detect that because it's different than the other ones. And then that'll be stored in the TPM. So it's only actually checking things that are new, that it hasn't seen before, and storing it in the TPM. So as long as it's, not like a ton of new pieces of software that it's running, as long as it's pretty consistent between all the runs, then you can easily just run like thousands within seconds and it should be fine.
Okay, great. That actually segues into my next question, which is you talked about building the integrity of the of a particular hardware. How about whatever the mechanism that you may use, and then whenever there is a malware installed on that one, you would be able to find out immediately. How do you differentiate between the malware versus my own application?
Yeah, so at least the way it is right now, you have to define your own whitelist of what's trusted and what's not trusted. So you'd have to go through, and we have scripts that will automatically check the whole machine. So you run it on your target machine, and it'll check all of that. But what we're working on with the Fedora project is integrating it into kind of like the package management system. So it'll automatically know every hash that's trustworthy. So it'll just be able to check and make sure it's actually signed by like Red Hat or something. So it'll automatically automate in that sense. At that point, it's just the firmware you'd have to know. And so a lot of those are just blobs of binary that the companies kind of put in there and don't really tell you what it does. So you can check to make sure that that blob is what you expect. Or you could encourage the person hosting your machine to use like open source firmware, and then you can actually check and know what it's doing. And so it depends on kind of what level of paranoia you have with your provider in there.
I'm going to jump in here. I know you have the microphone, but okay, thanks. And also a time check, because I know even though the event was scheduled to go until 5, I know that some of us have to leave a little earlier. I'm here until 5. I think some of our panelists may have to leave a little early, and if you do, obviously we respect that, and and thanks in advance for coming. We'll have a chance to say it again when you step away. But I just wanted to use this moment to kind of go all the way back to 80,000 feet or whatever it is, because, and by the way, thank you all very much for overlapping, not surprisingly because it's the same topic, but, complementary, the same beast. We've skewered it 3 different ways and clearly touching on similar themes. A lot of the questions, and certainly Charlie, yours among the 3, was much more of a more detailed focus on a particular solution, and to some degree yours as well, Chandra. And a lot of the questions have been on that. I want to go, if you think about a value chain where you have a solution provider, beavering away, I want to call it in the basement or, in a secure environment, and you go all the way to the other end, to the end user, right? And there's 2 steps at the end user. There's corporations, could be large businesses or small businesses, and then they in turn could have users in their organization or their own customers, last mile. American Express, I'm a user of American Express. A breach at Amex could affect me, right? So there's two layers on the other end of the spectrum. Can we pause just for context? And you guys provided useful industry overview and context of what the environment's like. But passingly, you mentioned not everybody has religion. Not many people have budgets. SMBs may not have budget, or they have budget that's different than what an Amex might have. But not everybody has religion too. You got to have budget, but you got to first believe you have a real threat that you want to put money behind. Can each of you, or 1 or 2 of you, maybe I'll start with you, Alan, can you walk us through what an incident, a severe incident looks like, and when a client or a customer or an end user gets, quote unquote, gets religion, what does that mean? What do they go through? What new insights do they have, and therefore what solutions are they now struggling to access? In response to which platforms or the AE solutions and the SOC are responses to. Can you kind of frame the problem?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting religion, that happens at different places for different people, right? Some wait until they're actually hacked, and they get notified. They don't even know they're hacked, right? They get notified by the FBI that their data is out somewhere. While clearly other people are much more, forward-looking. From my experience, typically, of course, smaller organizations with smaller budgets tend to try to get by on small, will typically put that off further, where larger organizations, like your example, this is part of their fiber right there. They can't run a business without that level of scrutiny. So I think for everyone, it's a different place in the journey. For a less mature organization, they're going to start out with the basics. Chandra talked about kind of the general hygiene. Well, most of them will already have that, but okay, have I done kind of a risk assessment? What kind of data am I housing? What is that I need to be protected by? And that's going to drive kind of how they will typically go about addressing the security concerns, right? If I'm housing customer data, clearly, the regulations are going to be a big issue for me, and I need to, start first by making sure that information is secure. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all, and I think it's very much dependent on the personality of the organization. And it's always a crawl, walk, run type of progression for, let's try to get the basics involved, under control, let's do a risk assessment, let's secure the data that we think is most critical to our survival.
And I see you nodding, Chandra. So maturity, progression, it's not a one-size-fits-all. What's been your experience?
No, I think
do you have to evangelize a lot?
I agree with Alan. That's the way it starts. So look, even in the big organization, it's a financials, they have been hit many times in there. A lot of times they didn't have to disclose it, but it's like they know that. So they kind of like wake up earlier than many other ones. There are many organizations, even though you can consider them, those are billions of revenue organization, and it still means like they don't have even good enough basic hygiene in there. And market is, if you see into the cybersecurity, is a very noisy market. There are like many thousands of companies out there, and they have some done features and functions, and everybody's kind of trying to sell the product out there. That's right. It's like whatever Charles was talking about it, somebody will go in and say, hey, I whitelist all the application, why you need his solution in there? His solution is a hindrance to your environment, then I have already whitelisted all that in there, and you have many whitelisting companies, they have done it, that's right, because most of the EDR companies, they'll say, all these things are whitelisted, why you want to go into the Keyline? Keyline is a waste of time, it is going to create more trouble, so you will not be able to run the applications and all that. So a lot of those educations then had to happen, that YTPM has to be there as well. Same thing like, let's say, I'll say about my organization, and I know about IBM as well. IBM, if you look into, they have 3,500 good-sized enterprise customers around the globe. But if they try to go into beyond them, they have the same challenges as we will have it there, because you have to go and educate the people, or sometimes they know there is once the incident happened, this is something saying goes on in the industry. Once you have the incident, people have all kind of budgets. Before the incident, they don't have any budget out there.
And it doesn't correlate with size. So you're saying there's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
There's solution providers, and they're competing for mind share.
Yeah.
If you haven't had an incident, you haven't gotten religion, so to speak. You haven't woken up. And you have to evangelize. The point is, even if there's a budget, or even if you are, somewhere on the maturity scale, the combination of maturity, immaturity, and noise requires solution providers to really work very hard to break through the noise. Even IBM for non-integrated accounts, whatever, you're really going to have to go in and start at the top and tell a story. So you were going to interject, go ahead and interject, but let me piggyback a question. When you go in to evangelize or cut through the clutter and the noise, who are you really pitching to? And I know it's not one size fits all. Some companies may not even have CSOs or CSIOs, or they may not be empowered, they may be buried into the organization structure. But do you typically have access to C-level folks, and who typically has got the ball or the baton, who owns the problem or the solution? Again, I'll go to you first, and then we can go around the table.
Well, I will say one thing. With the compliance landscape the way it is, it's becoming a board-level
decision. So certainly at the CISO, again, depending on what size organization you're talking about. But this is now becoming, because of the fines, because of the implications of data breach, because of the aggressive timelines, where you may have 24 hours or 48 hours to notify a regulator, and the implications, they now have teeth. They can seriously sue organizations. That has elevated the conversation, and that certainly helps. But again, to the smaller company, it's human nature. We're all overworked, and we're all trying to accomplish more and drive, the bottom line. And you're going to put your attention to the thing that you perceive the most immediate block to you achieving your goal. And if you've never had an incident, or that's not a burning situation at the moment, then that's the thing that gets the least attention. But that would be my comment.
Yeah, and I agree with Alan. That's what the situation is in the industry. One of the things we have seen, as he pointed out, the regulations, they are shifting the spectrum. But at the same time, what is also happening, that's on the larger side, and then people who have to deal with a certain kind of the data, as he pointed out, in the middle as well. But at the same time, what is also we have seen is the more and more work is kind of going to be happening with the people they have been trusting. So the people they have been trusting is, let's say you have those MSPs who provide them IT services and all that in there, and they are asking that, hey, IT guys, if you are up to SME as well, that, hey, look, can you guys kind of bring my security as well? One of the things is also nobody wants to go beyond their trusted circle easily. It's very hard to break out that trusted circle. So most of the time what will happen is we will end up seeing it in the next probably 5 to 10 years. Those MSPs, many of them will evolve and become MSP plus MSSP, the managed security provider as well in there, where they will provide themselves 24/7, or they will use a master MSSP who is doing the work for them 24/7, and these guys are the face. When certain things need to be done, they are already in the organization, they are face to face with the people, kind of leveraging the resources on the back end to address their issues. So that is, we see that is like accelerating in the last four and a half years. We were working with some of those in the beginning, that they forced us to do our multi-tenancy. Now we see even the biggest organizations like the NTT, KDDI, here you have Charter, Comcast, many other ones. They're all moving into that, hey, because they are repurposing the resources they had at their disposal. Say, hey, I want to be a major kind of a player into the security side of it.
Okay, and so that sounds like a migration towards, there can only be a few platform providers. So there's a push towards convergence. You've talked a little bit about it. Each one's starting from a different place on that sort of, on that game board, that circle, and trying to build out what they're missing and meet in the middle. But there will likely be, so one, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm asking you, as you look ahead, there is a hypothesis, and I heard it in your comments, at least 2 out of 3 of you, that there is noise in the market today, but there's probably an epic battle for platform ownership, maybe some consolidation there, and then the next layer of the ecosystem, like you were saying, Chandra, might be continue to be last mile, MSPs, MSSPs who own the customer relationship, but the core logic that animates the solution is going to belong to a few key folks who then have credibility, have breadth, have depth, have scale, economics work. And is that kind of how you see this thing evolving?
Yes, I think you have very, it's not that it's not going to, because it still is a very fragmented, it's going to stay that, because every organization needs a cybersecurity. So what will happen, there will be some big players will emerge, as you pointed out, that they will be the one who are providers, and then many other kind of companies will leverage that. And you will call them master MSSPs out there. And then there are a set of the people who are the last mile, who are building the relationship and all that. And that we have seen that, even if you look into, when you get into the internet connectivity came out, that was the way you were scaling it there, right? Same thing is happening, right, and accelerating right now on the cybersecurity domain as well. cybersecurity domain to get to, there will be major probably you will see that, let's say we sit down here 5 years down the line, we'll see that some players will have the platform and they are scaling into the millions of organization they are serving at that point. There will be few of them, and then there will be some smaller one, but there will be a lot of consolidations will be happening out there. You are absolutely right. And Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 comments. I mean, first and foremost, you're right. There can't be, everybody can't have every platform can't be successful, but absolutely, the market right now, all the big players are promoting platforms. IBM, from a security standpoint, IBM Security's doing it, Palo Alto's doing it, Symantec is doing it. All of the big players are trying to kind of grab that ecosystem. And they're going to use that, they're going to drive that into large enterprises, but they're also, for the MSSPs, they're also trying to fight for that MSSP market, right? It's all about scalability. We talked about the lack of skills. There's just no way this mid to smaller, size companies can really compete from a skills and just because of the nature of the rate of change of the threat landscape. So they're absolutely moving to MSSPs to try to consolidate that. And MSSPs are going to have I think they're going to play a huge, I think they're going to continue to see organizations migrate to using MSSPs because the complexity of the landscape is getting so great that the average, mid-sized companies can't really keep up with it. So.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to add on, I think Alan just brought up the point, which was really interesting, that MSSPs, they are going to grow, and then the people who are doing even the in-house, their own SOC operation, a lot of those will start also transitioning into the MSSP, because he inherently said that, but I just want to speak it out, because a lot of those people who have their SOC and is not really doing good job.
Because it's subscale?
Yeah, it's like, one thing is like, it's a hard. They are not expert into that in there, and at the same time, look, it's like we deal with a lot of big enterprises in there. They have a traditional solution in there. They have some have employed like 150, some have employed 100 people running the SOC at level 1, level 2, level 3, level analysts and all there. And then CIOs and CISO, global CIO and CISO, they said, oh, last 15 months or last 2 years, I didn't get anything meaningful out of it. And basically what they're saying is like, look, I'm spending like 50 million or 100 million. I want this work to kind of like, eventually I want to give out to somebody who really kind of live and breathe, and that's kind of like their core business in there. That's right.
So I think it's time to go back to the audience, but the reason I jumped in is I wanted to take the conversation to a different place. And I also wanted to give all of our panelists a chance to weigh in. Nothing against you, Charlie, because I know I'm going to lose one or more of you in a few minutes. So I have other questions, but I'm going to defer to the audience.
Thank you. This is Alkesh Shah. I'm a consultant. I consult with different verticals, financial services, healthcare, energy, utility. So I want to actually take us to a different direction as well. So we talked about the TPM, chip-based AI, ML kind of a thing. So cybersecurity is all about data, protecting your data, right? So as we go into basically the next generation of data-driven technology, so we talk about drones, we talk about transportation, all that stuff, right? So AI, ML, it's not about protecting. The data is going to be driving our life, right? So how do you envision, right, cybersecurity, protection, detection, elimination, and all the stuff? You use the word cybersecurity as a service, which I've never heard before, but that may be coming to that, right? We hear about cybersecurity criminals are not individuals anymore, like a nation's, threats kind of a thing. So let's talk about that topic in terms of, data-driven lifestyle, that is around the corner. And how do you envision the field of cybersecurity evolving to address that? So I would love to hear from each of you on that topic. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And if you look into right now, that's right, because any of the modern solutions which are coming in the cybersecurity, that's what those data is what is being analyzed. So just to give you an idea, it's like when we are looking into organization, and let's say even you talk about the drones, that's right, and it might be even like all the airplanes management, it's like which is running on the fly, running on the air, that's right. Now you have the solutions which can look into all of those data points in there, and they can look into those patterns put into the context and situational awareness in there. When we said that we provide the comprehensive cybersecurity, what we are doing is each and every activity is being put into the context. Same thing, I'll give you an example. Just you hear that there's a very famous drone company which kind of given drone to everyone and people run it and they put the application on their laptop. One of those person was in our organization. And he thinks that he's just running a simple applications in there, and you will hear about this. TPM is all about also protecting against the backdoor and all that thing in there. We are sitting in there and we are watching, and his data, he has like 4 gigabyte of the data. Since he was in our office, has gone on to a server in that foreign country, wherever that is. I don't want to give the name in there. And what is the 4 gig of the data? We looked into it, which are the data is going in there, which has nothing to do with the drone application. So you talk about is like, all this data-driven society in there. But look, it's like you have this application which gives you drive this way, drive that way in there. There are people mining the data, putting the intelligence in there. The same data can be also looked into. When we are extracting the features, I mentioned about 768 features. When we are looking those features, we are looking those from the cybersecurity context. There are other people who are looking the same data for the different purpose altogether. So that data-driven is what is giving you capability to kind of like derive all different kind of the values and provide the security around that. If something's not supposed to belong somewhere, and I'll give you, there was like before I started the company, there's a professor at the Georgetown University. He has written a book. And it's a book called Cybersecurity, but he has nothing to do with the cybersecurity and technology. He's more talking about the 9/11 attack. And his view, if you read through the book and all that in there, that all the data points were already there. These were the people who were being watched and all that in there. And when they were all converging in the Boston in there, if you have a solutions, like what we have in there, we would tell them that, oh, there is something is happening bad over here. You don't need any big intelligence in there. It will just say that there is something bad, why everybody is converging, that's right? So those things are, I'm saying, is already being done. There are a platform which are watching it. When we detect and say, I have actionable intelligence in there, that is what is driving the solution underneath, behind this scene, And that's what we say, the AI with the actionable.